Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for the latest segment of Affecting Change, EFF's live stream series, where our panelists tackle the latest issues in civil liberties and human rights and technology in the digital world. My name is Sarah Hamid. I'm the Director of Strategic Campaigns here at for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I'm going to be your host today for today's discussion. But before we start, we're going to have a few housekeeping items to go over. First, we will be recording this session, but only video of speakers are going to be included. Second, please join us now in the official chat via Twitch at eff.org/live stream. In this chat, you can drop your questions throughout the program, and our guests will answer as many as they can at the end. And if you're comfortable, we encourage you to say hi in the chat window now and let us know where you're tuning in from. For those of you who aren't familiar, EFF is a nonprofit whose technologists, activists, and attorneys have been fighting for your online privacy and free speech since 1990. You are the reason EFF can take on this important work. And if you'd like to help us in that fight to defend digital freedom, please consider donating at EFF.org/support change, or pick up a cool bit of EFF merchandise at shop.eff.org. And with that, I want to welcome our speakers, Andrew, Kate, and Reem. Andrew is the EFF Surveillance Litigation Director who focuses on surveillance, privacy, and cybersecurity. Reem is the Senior Campaign Director at Fight for the Future, and Kate is the Executive Director of the Digital Defense Fund and the founder of the Rural Privacy Coalition. We'll have about 15 minutes for your questions at the end, so if you haven't touched on something in the discussion that you want to hear about, please ask, and you can add them to the chat at any time. But first, over the last year, local communities have proven that ALPR, automated license plate reader contracts, are not inevitable. They're a political choice, one that cities can refuse. In 2025 alone, at least a couple of dozen jurisdictions have canceled, ended, or rejected FLOC's ALPR programs, from big cities like Austin and Denver to college towns and small suburbs. These wins share a pattern. People realize that surveillance procurement is power and started treating these contracts like political fights, organizing, testifying, and pressuring councils to say no. Today, we're going to unpack how that happens in practice, how the law is lagging, how organizers are filling the gap, and how neighbors are organizing together to shut down these systems. And to do that, we brought together these three incredible perspectives: legal strategy, movement organizing, and on-the-ground community work, and folks that I've learned a lot about in my organizing around this issue. But first, let's try to do a little bit of an explainer, a quick ALPR's 101. These systems are, what they collect, and why they're such a big deal. I feel like technology like this can be a little daunting, so it helps to kind of strip it down to its simple components and look at exactly what's going on behind the scenes. So at the core, ALPRs are just high-speed camera systems. They automatically capture images of passing vehicles, and they turn those snapshots into machine-readable license plate numbers. A few basic pieces work in sequence. Cameras take the picture, software isolates and reads the plate, and the system tags it with GPS location and timestamp, and then sends everything to a central server. From there, those plate numbers are checked against hot lists or other databases, and all of that information, plate, time, place, sometimes vehicle details, it's stored so officers can search it later through user portals. Those cameras can be fixed to poles, in traffic lights, and neighborhood entrances, mounted on patrol cars that scan while they drive, or set up as portable units on trailers that can be moved around wherever agencies want them. And the scale is staggering. A single system can scan thousands of plates per minute, and the overwhelming majority, 99.9%, belong to people who are not suspected of any crime at all. Companies like Flock Safety, Axon, and Motorola turn those scans into searchable history of where people travel: home, work, clinic, protests, mosques, and that data can be stored and shared across agencies and jurisdictions. So when we talk about canceling or rejecting ALPR contracts, we're not just debating a gadget, we're deciding whether our cities will allow ongoing outsourced tracking of people's movements. And with that, let's turn to Andrew to talk a little bit about case law, data flows, and EFF's impact litigation work. Hi, Andrew. Tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hi there. So my title is Surveillance Litigation Director. I help oversee EFF's work around surveillance technologies in the courts, so primarily Fourth and Fifth Amendment work. That can include things like cell phone tracking, the NSA's warrantless wiretapping the internet, everything in between. I also work on cybersecurity and what we call our Coders' Rights Project, giving legal advice to hackers, security researchers, and others who are trying to help the systems we all use be safer and more private for everyone. But I'm here today to talk about ALPRs, of course.
One sec, we're having a little bit of a technical issue. Can someone say hi?
I can hear you great, and let me know if you'd like me to just sort of launch into things.
Okay, I cannot hear it.
Well, I'll pick it up from Sarah and talk a little bit about how we are seeing
It's really
ALPRs
fun. Okay.
used in practice. So if you've looked into this issue at all, you've probably seen a lot of success stories put out by police agencies and governments, and those success stories play up one part of how ALPRs work almost exclusively, and Sarah already touched on this, the sort of use of hot lists and real-time searches. So the comparison of pre-existing lists of license plates, perhaps stolen cars, that sort of thing, or near real-time investigations of a license plate is reported in connection with a crime, and the police are looking for where that car is in real time. That's only half of how license plate readers are used. They're also used for what you might call retrospective searches. So police are investigating a crime and they're looking for where the car has been in the past. And that is a major part of how license plate readers work in practice, is these retrospective searches. Both of these involve the risk of criminalization and the risk of error. So back in 2024, we put out a list of what we call the human cost of ALPR, which talks about some of the times that ALPRs have gotten things wrong. So focusing on hot lists for a moment, we have a couple of case studies, including a woman in Aurora, Colorado, who was pulled over because her license plate matched the report of a stolen car. The only problem was it was the wrong kind of car and the wrong state of license plate. She was subjected to a search and being held at gunpoint. This is a very invasive kind of thing, even when they get it wrong. And then, of course, the retrospective searches can be used to place someone at the scene of a crime, of course, but also to investigate patterns of life. Sarah already talked about this. So we have examples of Johnson County, Texas, where a woman who self-administered an abortion was investigated thanks to a complaint by her partner. Police looked at where she had been over the previous week. Similarly, in that post I mentioned, where we have the errors of ALPRs, there's a case out of Detroit where police looked at everyone who drove a certain model of car and went to investigate an owner of a car who was miles away from the incident of a crime, merely because they had the model of car at issue, even though its physical description didn't match the crime itself. So those are some of the ways in which ALPRs are used to sort of aid in criminal investigations and criminalize individuals. I will pause there. I think we want to start talking about the law, but I want to make sure that Sarah is able to hear me. Yes.
I hear you now. Unfortunately, I did not hear any of the amazing things you just said.
So I was trying to give an overview of how ALPRs are used in criminal investigations, and I think we wanted to turn to talk about how the law functions in this area. But I will hand it over to you.
No, that sounds great. That sounds great. Yeah, let talk a little bit about how the law functions in this area.
Yeah, so one of the major constitutional protections we have here is the Fourth Amendment. And a function of our legal system, for better or for worse, is that the law is very reactive. So it has to catch up with innovations in police practices and in technologies. So the Fourth Amendment, as everyone is probably familiar with, protects our right to be secure in our persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. And for the first 200 years of constitutional law, it was fairly clear what a lot of those words meant. We know what those physical things mean, and what is unreasonable mostly had to do with what the framers of the Constitution had in mind when they wrote that. They didn't like the agents of the king, the Revolutionary War era, going house to house and searching people without a warrant. We know that sort of thing is an unreasonable search, and more than that, we know that if the police want to search your house or they want to seize your stuff, they might need a warrant for that, subject to some fairly well-known exceptions. Technology has the power to change all of this. So going into the 20th century, you see the Supreme Court wrestling with ways in which technology can change the police, the ability of the police to do investigations, to do surveillance. That really comes ahead with wiretapping in the middle of the century, where police don't have to touch anyone, they don't have to seize anyone in order to record their conversations, and even in private. And so the Supreme Court comes up with this idea of a reasonable expectation of privacy. If you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in something or in a place, generally the police are going to need a warrant to search it. That brings us into a more modern era when technology, surveillance technology, allows police to surveil people in public. And it was generally thought going into the 80s that surveilling people in public did not interfere with people's reasonable expectation of privacy, because it was basically what cops could have done in the old days. They could have followed someone around, watched where they went, and done old-fashioned, surveillance around the clock, perhaps. So you have these cases in the 80s where the Supreme Court says surveillance in public doesn't influence a reasonable expectation of privacy, except maybe if it's this sort of dragnet 24/7 surveillance, but that's for another day. We don't have that in the 80s. That starts to change about 10 years ago, a little longer than 10 years ago, when the Supreme Court is forced to look at technologies that do allow this sort of round-the-clock surveillance of people in public. First involving GPS trackers put on cars in the 2012 United States versus Jones case, and then surveillance of cell phone location information in the 2018 Carpenter case. And the rules that come out of those cases is that you actually do have a reasonable expectation of privacy in public, at least when it comes to long-term pervasive tracking of your movements. The Supreme Court in that Carpenter case in 2018 said, this technology, tracking cell phones, has the power to completely change the sort of privacy that was guaranteed by the Fourth Amendment when it was written, because it can go retrospectively back in time, like a time machine, see where people have been using their cell phones. That carrying a cell phone is sort of almost a requirement of participating in modern society. You need to have a cell phone to function in everyday life, and therefore you are a subject of surveillance. And then it runs against everybody. Everybody has a cell phone. These are some of the characteristics that the Supreme Court sort of called out when saying you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in your movements as revealed by cell phone technologies. That brings us to ALPRs. In our view at EFF, ALPRs have a lot of the same characteristics as cell phone tracking. They track everyone who's driving. There's no requirement that you be under suspicion when you track someone, and it can be done retrospectively, as Sarah said in her introduction. So cities and jurisdictions around the country have these systems in place, and they are searching them almost without restriction, looking backward, those retrospective searches that I was talking about. So in our view, the Fourth Amendment should regulate the use of ALPRs. Courts are just now starting to look at this, and there have only been a handful of decisions, most of which have said no. Individual criminal cases where police have used ALPRs, there is no Fourth Amendment expectation of privacy in that data. We're looking to change that.
Yeah, tell me a little about how you and others at EFF are looking to change that, and any ongoing ALPR related cases, and what you're asking the courts to recognize.
Yeah, so we have a major case that we filed back in November in the city of San Jose. We represent two nonprofit advocacy organizations, Siren and Care California, and we are challenging the city of San Jose's use of its ALPR system to search retrospectively tens of thousands of times a month. It's worth getting into a little bit of detail about how San Jose itself has built out this system. It's not unique. There are other cities in the country that have ALPR systems on the scale of San Jose's, but it is quite egregious. They have nearly 500 cameras. They keep the data from these cameras for a full year, and they search that database, as I said, tens of thousands of times a month without any kind of warrant requirement or even a requirement that there be criminal suspicion of the license plate that they're searching. So this to us looks like a vast, mass surveillance network. And so we are asking the court to say that the legal precedent that I was talking about, the Carpenter case and other cases on the Fourth Amendment, should apply here, and that San Jose should require a warrant before searching this database and require a warrant for anyone accessing its database. And as I'm sure we'll get into, many other jurisdictions in California can search these databases. So that's the sort of main flagship case. It's just filed back in November, so we're making our way as fast as we can through the courts. And of course, we are also involved as friend of the court in a number of criminal cases, constantly filing briefs trying to expand the court's views of exactly how these systems work, so they're not just focused on the specific criminal case in front of them.
And say you win. Say you win exactly what you're asking for, and cops are now required to get a warrant. What does that mean in practice
Well,
for ALPR systems?
in practice, I think that would drastically reduce the number of searches that are run on these databases. The warrant requirement is sort of the core of the Fourth Amendment, that the police have to go before a neutral judge and convince the judge that they have probable cause that a crime has been committed and they will get this evidence. Right now, they're not doing that. They are perhaps logging the reason for these searches, perhaps not. And there's simply no requirement that they be able to connect this to a particular crime. And in numerous cities around the country, we've seen searches run for non-criminal reasons, for investigation of First Amendment protected activity, for investigating people who've gotten abortions, all sorts of improper purposes, definitely in violation of California state law that prohibits investigating folks in using ALPR data for investigating immigration violations. Despite that law, it's being done all the time across California, and a warrant requirement would provide another very solid backstop against these kinds of improper uses of ALPRs.
Awesome. So backstops, that's what we're trying to get the courts to do, is to create backstops for these systems. Andrew, you just talked us through how expansive these data flows are and how the courts are very slowly being moved to recognize, by the amazing work that you and your team are doing, the reality of mass location tracking. But communities haven't been waiting for perfect case law before acting, right? They've been treated organizing as a way to close this gap in real time. And from Austin to Evanston to Eugene, campaigns have focused on forcing councils to end or reject flock contracts by combining legal arguments with public pressure and story-driven organizing. So Reem, I'd love to turn to you now to pick up that thread. Hi, Reem. Tell me who you are and a little bit about what you do.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Reem. I am based in the Bay Area, and I work for Fight for the Future. And I was really just blown away by being a part of the cancel flock contract fight in Oakland. And so very much, I've never actually seen in my time working in this, a moment where so many people were activated on surveillance who were so much smarter than me. And, many of the city councilors and many of the folks in the police department, in terms of knowing kind of what Flock's vulnerabilities were and being able to articulate it in such a sharp way. It really gives me hope that this is like an entry point for people to really oppose the myth that surveillance makes us any safer.
That's really powerful. There's been a long movement against ALPRs. Your organization, EFF, we've been focusing on this issue for a really long time now. But there's also been a real shift in popular consciousness, like you picked up on. What changed, and what are people seeing or experiencing now that's making them say that they have to fight this?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there have been plenty of privacy activists, privacy groups that have been raising the alarms on ALPRs and just in general about the dangers of surveillance. Stepping back, speaking more broadly, I think the privacy community draws upon historical examples like the use of informers during World War II or COINTELPRO in this country to try and make the case that it's dangerous to green light any sort of practice or technology that has the potential for mass surveillance. And I think for years, it feels like these fears have been brushed aside as hypothetical, or maybe these risks felt far removed from people. In terms of what's changed, I'd say we're getting a really hard lesson today about why surveillance is so difficult to future-proof. We're practically live streaming how ICE is using surveillance tools like license plate readers and facial recognition to brutal and violent ends. They're tearing families and communities apart in Minnesota and in neighborhoods across the country. In a similar way, like the overturn of Roe v. Wade has created new scary openings for hostile states to criminalize abortion care. And I think that's opened up some public awareness about how data sources like social media or other seemingly benign databases can be repurposed to go after abortion seekers. And so, I think this is definitely been a moment, an unlocking moment, and has visibilized like the harms of mass surveillance at a scale that I feel like is maybe new. But I'll note that these harms have always existed before, especially for Black and Brown communities and other hyper surveillance marginalized communities that experience surveillance. But more and more people, I would say, are seeing themselves and their neighborhoods in Minneapolis.
And building on what we heard about legal levers, like not collecting data in the first place or requiring warrants to access if it is collected, how do those tools fit into organizing strategy on the ground that you're seeing in places like Oakland?
Yeah, I think it's obviously really important to have legal protections and use the legal levers wherever possible. And there are gaps that we have to fill and that organizing has filled, as we've seen in the case of Flock. Being based in California, we do have a law that's in theory intended to protect license plate data from getting into the wrong hands. But unfortunately, the law isn't always being followed. And it does require like litigation to try and get it enforced, which brings me to the thing that I really want to highlight today is the most important, opening that we have, and that's the inspiring and effective organizing that's happening at the grassroots level, the community members who are showing up to city council, filing Public Records Act requests, looking into the research, educating their own community, and getting these contracts canceled left and right all around the country. And I saw this with my own eyes in Oakland, like I mentioned, and it was incredibly heartwarming to see just how eloquent and educated the community members were, schooling their own city council and being able to refute like the Flock reps' talking points in real time. It was incredible to see. And, I was speaking to you a little bit earlier about this, Sarah, but I find the Flock CEO's crash outs very instructive and clear evidence that the community's power in all of this is super, super strong. The Flock CEO, Garrett Langley, has written to police departments, warning them about coordinated attacks on law enforcement, and has been accusing people of, quote, trying to turn a public records process into a weapon against you and me. And, this one isn't funny, actually. He went as far as to compare the amazing community organizing as terrorism in a recent interview, and which is one, incredibly dangerous, mirrors the language that we're hearing from DHS officials, and it's wrong on so many levels. But two, and this is the encouraging thing, it tells me that all of this momentum to get contracts canceled has been so effective, and it's probably helping Flock go broke. So I think that's a bit of hope that I've been holding on to. And just, I want to stress this because, I think it can feel like, maybe your city fight or the conversation that you're having within your neighborhood may seem small, but it's actually the most powerful thing and the most effective thing that we've seen so far.
And what kind of folks are you seeing show up to city council? Is it like privacy advocates?
It's amazing. Like a lot of these folks I'd never met before. So we had folks come out from the tech sector, which was so amazing for them to be able to refute a lot of the claims that we were hearing from Flock or the misinformation. And we also had families, youth, like it was just such a mix of people, and lots of them were just people who were concerned about protecting their neighbors. And it was just such a diverse group, and gets painted in such a false light. But I think it's because, the people power is so scary to the corporate surveillance tech interests like Flock.
Okay. So in other conversations with me, you've often stressed that it's not about just critiquing these systems. We have to offer real interventions for folks on the ground who are just trying to defend their neighbors to really show up with. So from your perspective, what strategies have been most effective, and what options do you see for people who want to get involved?
Yeah, so there are lots of different there are lots of different ways to fight at this, because even the city contract fight is one of them. You know, Flock also has contracts with businesses like Lowe's and Home Depot. They also, you know, partner with homeowners associations. Perhaps they're in a school or a hospital. Like they have there are so many different avenues that we can get at Flock. And so that's part of the reason why we put together a toolkit that I believe will be shared in the chat, really to help people get started and draw upon the amazing organizing that so many people that I'll bet who are watching this webinar were a part of all across the country, you know, to help people start asking the right questions, potentially start a campaign in their own city, or, you know, get involved in the fight against Lowe's or some of the other targets. And I'll just say, like, one thing that I feel like I'd underestimated, but I really saw the power of most recently with the Super Bowl. For those who tuned in, there was an Amazon Ring ad that was used to promote a really creepy AI feature that purports to find missing pets. But the amazing thing about this is that so many of the people who saw it could immediately clock how creepy and dangerous this feature was. And the reception of the ad was so negative. There were Reddit threads popping off left and right, people trying to cancel their Ring subscriptions, and requesting for a refund from the company. It was so negative that Ring decided to cancel its partnership with Flock, which is great. And now, like, there's so much more we can do, like, for example, to spread awareness that Ring also has a partnership with Axon Enterprise, which is another surveillance company that also has some ties to ICE. And so, yeah, I think there are many opportunities for people to get involved. If you're, for example, a student on campus, you know, you can look in and see whether your university has a contract with Flock. I'm sure many of these businesses left and right have contracts with Flock. And so really it starts with a few neighbors. It starts with conversations about this. And I think people are ready to have them.
Awesome. Awesome. So one theme in what Reem described was that these wins don't come from one movement sector. They come from coalitions that include folks like us, privacy advocates, but also immigrant right groups, racial justice organizers, reproductive justice organizers, and more. And they're also not limited to big coastal cities. Flock is aggressively targeting small towns and rural counties, often with no public process whatsoever. So that means victories depend on people seeing this not as a niche tech fight, but as a shared community issue, something you can start working on with your neighbors, even if you're not part of a formal organization. So let's turn to Kate, who has lived this very fight in her own rural community. Hi, Kate. Tell us who you are and something about what you do.
Yeah, so I am Kate Bertash. I am the executive director of the Digital Defense Fund, which actually meant that I have been very lucky to work with the EFF team for many years on issues like license plate readers, especially as they affected folks in the abortion access space. I remember actually one day that Dave Maas and I, who is now the director of investigations at EFF, were talking a little bit about license plate readers and how ubiquitous sort of license plate surveillance is around abortion access clinics. And this many years hence, then I was hanging out in my house, and my husband one day, he just reads to me this news article that says that my very small county in rural Washington has already installed Flock cameras just across the county, and I kind of like hit the ceiling a little bit. Since here's an issue that I had been involved on and doing lots of art projects around with this line of clothes called Adversarial Fashion that injects junk into license plate readers specifically. And so here, this thing that I had been taking action on and reading about and studying had come to roost in my own home. And the worst part was that I actually, in other counties, neighboring counties, they had actually had a discussion about whether or not they wanted to install Flock cameras and take on that contract. Our counties are very, very broke. Unfortunately, like, budgets are stretched extremely thin. Flock cameras are a discrete sort of, part of the pieces that they deploy the hardware very quickly so that they can then get that recurring revenue stream of the, you essentially rent the equipment from the company. And they have lots of things that they'll tell your small town department about, you're clearly understaffed. These are something that can help you out. And so I think it was like very, very fitting that suddenly all the stuff that I had learned, like, could I put it into practice then in the place that I call home? How much does the stuff that we all get to talk about matter if I can't then bring it to my neighbors and hope that we can hear each other? So that was kind of like where it all started. I was just very stunned to find that out and decided to, take everything that I'd learned from all of you and put it into action. So
one of the things that's been really important last year is like storytelling from our own local context so that we can learn from each other. What was it like break it down for us? What was it like when Flock came to your little rural town? And, especially one that has a tiny budget, what did that process look like?
Yeah, so we have actually, it's like a pretty, like, to put it in full context, my whole county is about 12,000 people. My town is 1,000 people. So like very, very small town. When you put in cameras like this, they are like placed at places that are kind of choke points that then could capture pretty much every single person. We don't have a ton of roads running in or out of this place. So the data not only is sensitive everywhere, but it becomes sensitive in a different way when it is extremely easy to kind of pick people out and track all of their daily movements in and out of their house. I think one of the things that was very, very good to start is that our small town also has a really, I think, strong set of connections around like speaking up and attending public meetings. And so that kind of felt like the right format to get started. I know that I appreciate how much a small town has to cover in something that's an official like Board of County Commissioners meeting. So I think it's very confusing is that sheriffs in these kinds of counties actually have a lot of power. They have a lot of purchasing power. The Board of County Commissioners does not really have any like control over what the sheriff does. The only really way to like have any impact is to actually just vote in a different one. So there are very few avenues, especially when you're kind of lacking in, I would say, like both legal power and money. Like, here we're thinking like, oh, if I want this stuff out, am I going to need to do a ballot measure? That sounds really expensive. Am I going to need to like file a lawsuit? I don't know if I have standing, and we don't really have money to retain an attorney. And so I kind of decided to go back to the drawing board on the fundamentals, which is holding a town hall, not expecting it to be hosted by any of like a elected official or an official office. I want to say like you have the right to rent a room at the library for free and pass out flyers and tell all your neighbors and post it up wherever it's listed online. Something that I think that could be kind of surprising to the privacy set is that we actually don't have anything like a newspaper or a TV station or anything. So Facebook is kind of where it's at. And that was a really, really strong key piece of organizing, was making sure that not only we had these group meetings, but that they were also advertised in the places that people go to. A lot of small towns, they really rely on that infrastructure. I think something that was really pleasantly surprising is that we invited, elected officials, we invited the sheriff, and the sheriff and deputy showed up. And we had 3 separate meetings across, I would say, the better part of a year. Another really strong piece of the like puzzle on strategy was like, it's really easy to get in a room and to like say what's upsetting you, but sometimes the data really can help take a lot of the like, very interpersonal, emotional piece of it. It's like, this is just the truth. So we filed a bunch of public information requests. We could actually get that contract and find out that these 6 cameras were going to cost us, $40,000. They came mostly from some grant that a, state organization around car theft was going to provide. I think what was funny is that it showed the actual data on how many car thefts that we had. And it actually, I want you to imagine in your mind, for $40,000 a year for this like very small town with a very thin budget, how many car thefts do you think is going to be worth it? And it was 6 in the last year for which it was measured. So again, thinking about like what makes it worthwhile versus other things that are very urgently needed in our budget. And I think what was helpful is that getting to pull not just the data on how the contract came to be, but then also getting data back from other helpful folks who filed on places like Muckrock to actually get how the data was used, like how many times was it searched and by who. It really helped, I think, make sure it wasn't too personal. Like, this is just the system and how it works. I don't know how they explained it to you at, the sheriff's office, but this is what we see. And this is like, I think one of the things that was most startling to people to look at, especially from a small town point of view, is that our sheriff's office in a 6-month period had searched the system maybe 500-ish times. There were certainly issues, in my opinion, with how they used it and what they searched it for. But then the orders of magnitude more that other jurisdictions searched our data, it was like hundreds of thousands of times a month versus like a few dozen maybe from our own sheriff's office. And so like that's the kind of very like shocking data that I think like takes it back into context. Well, like maybe you didn't know this either. I was actually able to find, unfortunately, that search for the person who's allegedly, had an abortion. They searched our cameras as well. And so I think that was also really kind of like startling to folks. I think the kind of like last thing I wanted to note, because I think it's sort of like the window forward on a lot of this, is that after just 3 of these, our sheriff's office decided that they didn't want to renew the contract and that they were going to try and get them removed. And I think it was just from hearing from everyone. The room represented the full political spectrum. I would say like people who were probably like the voting pool for the sheriff's office, like gave it to them worse than me. But I think it was like some people had said stuff that it was like, it stuck with me. Like one of the key phrases that someone had used, who I'm positive, like this person would probably not like any of the rest of my politics, but they said, I might like you as sheriff. I might trust you. I might have voted for you. We might have grown up together. But what happens with the person who comes after you if we just automatically give this power to this office and I don't trust the next person, then what am I supposed to do? And I think that framing, the fact that like 100% of the room was unified, despite us having, plenty of differences across the board, it like gave me a lot of hope and it made me really proud to live where I live, that like privacy is the thing that cuts through. And the way that I'm seeing now this ripple effect across the country, across like every town, big and small, has been so, so deeply inspiring. And I'm really grateful we got to have some small corner of that here in small town Washington. So
yeah, beautiful.
Thank you.
And so it was 3 of those forums basically where you brought folks together and they were having this conversation.
Yeah, like that's what it took, was like really in-depth conversations. And I think my encouragement to people is that when it's not a like official office holding the microphone, you get to like pass it to each other. You get to say like people get to hold the mic and express themselves. And a lot of those difficult emotions about like, how do we all disagree about things like what it takes to stop crime or something or to prevent it? You kind of burn through a lot of the hot stuff in the first like 10 minutes, and then people really open up and they hear each other. And I think it gave us a lot of really great practice for all kinds of tough conversations I feel we're more equipped to have in the future, as surveillance technology is certainly going to come back for us and every place in which we live. So I thank you for listening to my wonderful long story. I'm just really grateful to be a piece of the puzzle here.
Okay, I want to bring you all together to look at some of the cross-cutting challenges and opportunities that show up across your work, especially in places where the law organizing and local campaigns intersect. So these next questions are for anyone to jump in. Feel free to build on each other's answers. The first is, when you look at existing ALPR laws or policies, what is one loophole or ambiguity that worries you the most? Anyone can jump in. And if not, I will start talking. So please, somebody jump in.
Well, I can start us off. Several of us have already touched on this, that, here in California, we have a law that prohibits the use of ALPRs for immigration enforcement and, in fact, sharing out of the state. And we've seen that abused and just ignored by jurisdictions across California. And so without a clear remedy against that sort of thing, I worry a lot that we're just going to keep seeing these stories as replicated across towns in the Bay Area and Southern California, that these sort of side door access to ALPR systems, that an officer in one department is asked by someone perhaps in the federal government or in another department that's not supposed to have access, hey, search on my behalf, just do it for me. And we need stronger controls on the access to these things at the very minimum.
One thing that I'll add that isn't necessarily written into these policies, but it actually like shows what is so dangerous about, the way that this flock data gets shared. Oftentimes, there is a revolving door between some of these surveillance tech companies and law enforcement officers. And so in a lot of the cases that have been frequently reported about ICE agents getting access or state police using it to criminalize abortion, it is, you know, an ICE agent tapping his buddy at a law enforcement agency for access to that database, and it's not recorded. Like there's no, you don't need a direct connection or contract with Flock oftentimes for these mishaps to happen. And that's like one of the things that I feel, you know, people and especially lawmakers really need to pay attention to a company's track record and really chasing how these mishaps happen, because oftentimes it's not a policy fix, right? And I think that's something that hasn't gotten enough attention.
Yeah, just to pick up on that similarly, I think I often worry that when we're seeking especially to regulate some of these technologies, that we can focus really on the structure of the tech as it is today. Like what's even the interface and what it looks like. And, you know, I come from a space where, like, you know, license plate surveillance at abortion clinics is people standing around with a GoPro camera or like a notebook and a pen. And like, how do we think about surveillance, like agnostic to the specific type of technology used? Because as we see, it changes more and more every single year. And I do worry about the ability to then scoot around sort of a too in-depth description of a specific type of collection. So yeah, there's where I worry about it.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so the next is about changing people's minds. We've heard a lot of arguments today about why ALPR systems are especially dangerous, but I'm wondering if you could tell me about one data point or story about ALPR errors or misuse that you found especially effective in changing people's mind. Andrew, you're making these arguments in courts, in front of lawmakers. Reem, you're talking through movement spaces. Kate, you're talking to your neighbors. What's been really effective at changing how people view these technologies?
I'll share a little anecdote actually that happened, you know, when some folks were organizing a drop Flock rally in Oakland during, you know, the contract discussions, and there was a counter protest of, you know, mostly paid actors making the argument that Flock and other surveillance tech is preventative. And one of the things that I heard, you know, one of the organizers say, and this became, you know, a genuine discussion actually between two folks, and you know, they had made the argument that surveillance and these cameras do nothing to prevent crime. You know, a lot of the research and data suggests that it does absolutely nothing to prevent or reduce crime. All it does is document it, and that documentation is the thing that, you know, that can be misused down the line. You know, as Kate was saying, you never know who's going to come, what administration's going to come next. And so I think that was like I think that unlocked things for a few people, and I really appreciated hearing that exchange go about.
We're going to transition to audience questions now, and there's a bunch of them. We're not going to get to all of them, but one of them is, again, this thread of like, what have you found most effective to convince people that surveillance is actually harmful, not just in the case of ALPRs? So any other reflections on that you all want to lift up?
I think honestly, it's a very good way for people to sort of surprise me about, you know, where we were very much aligned. I think we got to bring a lot of the conversation back to like how we want to live together. And like, I think it was interesting because, you know, you think, okay, I need to show people that mistakes can be made. That's very powerful. Or that in real life, when these systems are deployed, I got to show data about how it's actually used. Those are also very helpful. So like public records requests, I think, are excellent to really get the truth in the mix. But then I think it like let us kind of cut through and talk about like, you know, is this the kind of relationship I want to have with my neighbors when I move to a small town or to a beautiful city? Is this the kind of like way I wish we solved that problem? And I was very kind of like surprised by people's openness to talking about how like, well, if this is an issue, like how actually would we choose to solve an issue of, say, like we have search and rescue needs here in our area, and like it let us kind of open up really naming what it is we thought we wanted that system for and trying to like be open to other ways of solving it. I think helped people walk away from one technology to something else rather than just feeling like they're left with nothing.
Awesome, that's super helpful. Okay, someone else is asking about specifically how the data flows to immigration. So they're saying that Flock Safety has said that they do not share information with immigration and customs enforcement. and they would like us to talk more about, I think, Andrew, you mentioned side door sharing, but what about the intersection between the data captured by ALPRs and immigration and potential concerns? How is that working in practice?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly been a number of reports based on public records requests and others, just documenting all of the ways in which these searches can find their ways into the hands of federal officials. So the side door sharing that I mentioned before, doing it at the request of someone else, just misconfiguring these systems is a real problem. So as we've talked about several times already, California requires that cities in California, jurisdiction in California, not share outside of the state. But from what we've seen, that is controlled within these systems, within the Flock system, for example, through a series of checklists that can be, simply just filled out wrong and allow that data to be shared out of state. And so there have been a number of exposés that they go out of state, and once it's out of the hands of the initial collector of the data, there's really no control on how it gets shared. And so in jurisdictions where they're more comfortable sharing with the federal government, whether that's not prohibited, it gets into immigration proceedings. So we've published a number of sort of investigations of this. My colleague Dave Moss and others have done this, and then certainly starting in San Francisco and Oakland and all over the state, there have been documented cases of either searching by ICE or the federal government, or the sort of one step removed at their request.
That's super, super frightening. Thank you for explaining that. Others are asking, for argument's sake, I've heard people come back at ALPR concerns with, quote, I'm already being tracked through other technology, so why worry about this? What kind of rebuttals to this kind of comment or thinking do you have?
Well, I can say that we see this argument both in everyday conversations, but also in court. You have the government saying, well, we're not tracking everybody all the time. We're tracking some cars some of the time. We're not even tracking the people driving those cars. We're just tracking the cars themselves. That has never really been the way we look at privacy in the law. We have never said, well, look at all the things that the government isn't searching. So I think it's important to sort of break it down and think about, well, who's tracking you and for what purpose? Yes, there's consumer privacy tracking happening all the time. Maybe that's being, making its way into the hands of the government as well. This is the government, when we're talking about ALPR systems, this is the government tracking your movements many times a day across space and time, and connecting that with other tracking systems all across the country, and allowing that to be searched by law enforcement all across the country. That is a capability that law enforcement has never had, and would have, I think, shocked the drafters of the Constitution. That idea of subjecting an entire populace to suspicionless surveillance really goes against exactly what they were trying to do when they drafted the Bill of Rights.
Kate, I saw you go off mute. Do you want to add something to that?
Just basically that whenever I've heard folks talk about it, especially in like a small room, neighbor to neighbor, a lot of it is like, well, isn't it really meaningful then that we would choose to not make the problem worse? That like if we are being tracked in all these different ways, like, wouldn't it be great to like have a little courage and say that I'm going to take the part of it that I can control and just express the right to say no? I think that sense of like autonomy and consent, I think, were really, really powerful arguments in the room.
And can I just add, and I'm sure, sorry, you could probably speak much more in depth about this, but, it is true that Flock is the tip of the iceberg. And even after cities have moved to cancel contracts, I think we really can't squash our own hope and squash our own momentum, because a lot of these cities are then investigating, okay, well, which alternatives are the cities going to? A lot of them are swinging straight to Axon, right, that has a lot of the same problems. And the point is, this is the entry point for people to understand the risks, and we can decide that this is not something that we want and start to wind it back. And, we do it one fight at a time. I don't think that the city contracts, I mean, been an incredible movement, and it's also opened up space for people to do organizing against the businesses that have it. Now students are starting to investigate their own university campuses to see if they have contracts. And I think really what we need to normalize, the bigger goal here is to normalize that mass surveillance is not a public safety response. We are responsible for public safety. And, you know, I think, Kate, a lot of the stories you shared, like that, those are exactly the conversations that we need to start funneling people towards.
Awesome. Awesome. Also want to spotlight, I know, Andrew, if you want to speak to this, but I also know Kate and Reem, you've seen some of this. Somebody's asking about to what extent it's good to leverage showing neighboring municipalities that your own community decide to shut it down, and how effective of a tactic is that? And how have we seen that show up in fights, in regional fights?
Yeah, it was super helpful to get to point to like news articles about how a neighboring county had like an open discussion, and that it was much more transparent. And that, you know, I think it certainly doesn't stop any of these neighboring counties from implementing this technology in the future. But it was just like, well, you know, we deserve no less, I think was a really, really wonderful narrative to keep repeating.
Yeah, normalizing the conversation, having the conversation, and also normalizing making our elected officials and the people who make surveillance purchasing decisions in our city responsible and accountable for those decisions, right? Especially if they're putting our community members at harm. Absolutely. Okay, somebody wants to talk about the whole tech stack. They say, I know flock ALPRs have been a major area of focus, and for good reason, but they're also really concerned about their Condor cameras, gunshot detection, and especially their drones as first responder program. How should community activists be thinking about and preparing for these threats as well? Who wants to feel that one?
I would say, you know, ride the tail of, you know, whatever victories that you've had, and the victories of other folks, you know, who are fighting back against these in cities. I think it makes it a lot easier to go after other pieces in the tech stack, you know, once there's been a precedent. And I think at this point, I don't know what the internal tracker is of how many cities have canceled their contracts, but I think it's above 36 at this point. And that means something. And I think we're also seeing that mirrored in terms of congressional inquiries into these tech companies. And I think, you know, we don't really have to reinvent the wheel necessarily. I think just following the momentum that we have and applying it and asking questions to this and other technologies. Yeah.
And these are portable skills, right? Once you learn how to read a flock contract, you can read a shot spotter contract, right? And really start making the same. You're nodding, Kate. Is that kind of
Yeah, I mean, like asking for all of these different contracts. We actually had this is a great segue too, because I learned a lot more actually about Washington state law about any cameras or detection devices in the Department of Transportation right of way. And then I was actually able to find some privately owned devices around our area that people had concerns about. They were like, who owns this? Why is it pointed at the road? And we were able to get those removed as well. So it was like kind of amazing to see that everything that we had learned, we knew all the right, like actually offices to ask for this information from. We knew that, you know, there are other agencies who are here to help you to understand whether or not these have been properly permitted or are lawful in the space. So it was really cool to see that the toolkit that we had built out to kind of confront one particular technology, once we had that connection list and understood how to file those public information requests, they could apply for any kind of tech contract you can think of.
And are you seeing people still stay engaged in that initial organizing container that you created on this topic, start looking at other surveillance issues too?
Yeah, we just actually also tackled an issue with a drone program that was supposed to go into a neighboring county. So that was like a really, really amazing thing to see. I think in that case, it was people had suddenly perked up when you start to change what people think they are allowed to ask questions about, they come to you and they'll like, we've already now got folks coming back and saying like, oh, I saw on the city council meeting that they were mentioning something about a drone purchase. Should we be worried about that? And that got another process started where we were able to then file more information requests and get a lot more to discover in this case that it was a DJI drone that was soon going to be banned by the FCC. So I think that was really, really important that we were able to then intervene because people's instincts had been changed around what they think that they're allowed to like say, hey, wait a minute, pull the brakes, let's ask more questions. So I love getting to change people's expectations that way.
Not just the tech stack. So how do you take this, the momentum, the gains, the wins, the organizing, and kind of the literacy that's built around the ALPR fights and connect it to other issues that you're working on, like abortion access or immigration or protest rights in practice and not just in theory? How are you connecting it to the broader movement space?
Well, I mean, like, I'm happy to jump back in. Sorry to like, thank you for leaving so much wonderful space for this. I am very excited because I think it gets to help us kind of go back to the bread and butter of a lot of what DDF does at my day job, which is that people often come in and they're very excited to take action on surveillance issues for immigration or for, in particular, abortion access in a lot of the groups that we work in. And it actually helps us to then say, like, what we know, what is the threat model, and if people get really excited to like build new tech for it, how do we know it's really going to reach the people most in need? And I think it helps us to like ask good questions because people are like, oh, should I invent an app that, you know, gets me away from all of these different pieces of things? And you get to instead kind of like have realistic expectations for, I think what especially I worry about a lot, which is that our response to surveillance, if we were just kind of thinking linearly, is to close up and hide and to like withdraw from public space and to like be scared to go drive across state lines and get my abortion. And I just don't think that's a way to live. And I think, you know, instead, this helps us get to come back to those spaces where people are being surveilled and criminalized and reaffirm their right to take up space, to use like safe, affordable, private technology to meet everyday human needs. And I just love how like it's allowed us to invert by saying like, yeah, we were able to push back and say, I have the right to drive down the street without my whereabouts being shared with the entire United States. And I love getting to like reaffirm again and again that like we have a right to exist fundamentally.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to transition to one last final prompt for everybody, but do you have last thoughts or things you want to bring up around that issue before transitioning? Once, twice? Okay. This is the final question for everyone on the panel. I just want like a brief reflection from you to tell us one thing you've learned from each other's work, legal fights, the movement organizing, the neighbor campaigns that you wish more people just understood. Anyone can jump in, but I want all of you to reflect on that, please.
Well, I will say, you know, working on impact litigation, it can be a very slow and time-consuming process that, you know, progress is slow in coming. These cases can take years. I still think that having the stories told that we've heard on this kind of panel is extremely helpful and directly relevant to litigation. And that's because judges are people too. I know that's a controversial statement, but they are. And they care about their communities. They are influenced by hearing about how people feel about this. They're not going to let that change their view of the law, of course, but you know, making these things personal is not just something that affects all of us in the community. It also affects how courts and governments treat these technologies. So I think having these stories at the ready is relevant even in the sort of airless world of litigation that you know moves at a snail's pace.
Thank you, Andrew. Reem, Kate?
Sure. I would say that, you know, there's a role for everyone in this fight. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to understand the technology in and out in order to have a voice in this. And I think, in fact, it's, you know, when you can speak to everybody's sensibilities, like the way that Super Bowl moment had, you actually have such a tremendous potential for impact. And so I would really just encourage people to get involved, and you'll learn along the way, and don't be deterred because you don't feel like you're an expert enough.
And likewise, I've learned from all of you how to be like the firepower that public had to even the smallest organizing situation. Like, you know, the truth is on your side and the truth wants to be free. And I think that really empowered us the whole way while we had, you know, little other resources except good information. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing your learnings with us. That is all we have time for. Thank you, Andrew, Kate, and Reem, for joining us today. And thank you to everyone who contributed to the discussion in the chat and all the great questions, and everyone watching around the world. Digital rights begin with you. EFF has been a leader in privacy, freedom of expression, and innovation for 35 years, and we need your help to keep the fight up. Become a member today at EFF.org/support-change. We hope you will continue these conversations about your civil liberties with your colleagues and friends and neighbors. Be sure to mark your calendars for the next segment of Affecting Change on Thursday, March 19th, where we'll be talking about Cindy Cohn's new book, Privacy Defender, a chronicle of her 30-year battle to protect our right to digital privacy. The book will be released Tuesday, March 10th, but you can pre-order today. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.